Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute. And as I said, we are all part of the North American team, but we're represented by many people from around the world. And we are grateful that you're here because this is a worldwide project. And so we are continuing into 2026 at a time that we will look back on history at pivotal moments in our recent past, and we'll reflect on it, and we'll have lots of commentary. But the most important thing that we have to understand is that we are at that pivotal moment where we can finally bring peace and prosperity to this planet. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute, Teachings on Plasma Science. We're discussing the intermediate PICO-TEC series. Our first topic is ribbons. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is February the 22nd of 2026. Lots of twos in this number. This is part of the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So I hope you enjoy this new journey. We have had many journeys, and so when we review where we've come from, we try to condense it into many bite-sized pieces, as I say. And after the PICO-TEC series and in the basics, we discussed the PICO core, the construction, deconstruction, reconstruction of the PICO stars, and of course, that non-existent biggity bangity. And we're moving on into the intermediate PICO-TEC series, and we're going to discuss a different line of thinking because we have to incorporate not only what we're doing today, because the technology is now within our hands, but how we've gotten here with respect to the past and how we can navigate this new path. And so, as we've always said, it has to do with plasma. But our focus has been on the matter plasma. And the matter plasma is basically our gravitational feelings of the physicality, where we can touch it and see it. But our plasmatic aspect of it is magnetical, where we can't touch it or can't see it. But it's a supporting structure. And so man is always feedback dominant, because whether it's a magnetical plasma or a gravitational plasma, it is still very much part of the matter plasma dimension. But we're trying to transcend that, and what's difficult is we have to think outside of the box. And so that has taken us into an understanding that we're not just doubling up, but we're also increasing by levels of magnitude. That is 10 times 10 times each level. And so we have delved into the pico state, matter state, And we're trying to go beyond that as well. But before we can, we have to understand where we are. It's many times been said, well, we're so above, so below. And it's interesting to hear that. What does it mean exactly? So historically, many of the traditions and discussions have been veiled in different languages. Latin was one of them, like Corpus Robur. And this is really the oak tree. And it's associated with longevity. And it can take up to 100 years to fully develop and can live for hundreds of years, even nearly 1,000 years. Wow, it's very impressive. And as far as ecology is concerned, the oak trees support high levels of biodiversity, providing habitat and food for numerous insects, mammals, and birds. But it also carries a symbolism. These trees are deeply integrated into folklore and are historically regarded as symbols of wisdom and strength. Well, yes, it is. Oak is a hardwood. But we like to tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. And a long time ago, there was a famous song as a prisoner was being released to understand if his coming home was welcome. And the signal would be a yellow ribbon tied around the old oak tree. But there have been many meanings for these yellow ribbons. And I had to be careful in this discussion because coming from Canada, the yellow ribbon means fighting cancer. But it also has a reference to hostages and lost relatives, and in the military as well, lost lives. And so the yellow ribbons have many meanings. And it's understandable that it's confusing. But the thing about it is that it represents an emotion. And that is the new course that we're embarking on, this emotional path. And how does it affect our understanding of the principal matter? So if we look at the PM ticks, which are the principal matter, and they are magnetical and they come as an energy pack and they converge into antimatter, dark matter, and matter gen. And this becomes a plasmagen conversion. It is not in the physicality at this point in time. But there's a field interaction with another physicality, and that is the Magrav condition of the Earth space. And so when the physicality of our space interacts with the Earth space, then that becomes our physicality. And so there's that interaction, which we call inertia. And how do we derive a practical purpose and explanation and usage of this type of knowledge? Well, we are in the beyond Beijing era. There have been many eras over a period of time, but this era is post May the 10th of 2025 when the gold rush began of 2025, but now there's a silver rush in 2026, and the rush continues. And so it's come down to the point, it's not just a matter of understanding, but it's a matter of adoption. Can we adopt this practical approach to fulfilling our presence here? Because we have depended on the atomic structure, but we got into the monatomic structure of the nano, and now we're into the PICO atomic structure, which is even smaller. And we're going beyond that. We're getting very close to that reality. that reality of our existence. Our existence is part of the transmutation highway. Well, we were on the transmission highway, which is the lowest energy field. And then there's that transition highway in between. And how do we decide? Are we going up to the transmutation or down to the transmission? But is the transmission into physicality the only transmission that we understand? And so we've opened up a new can of worms, if you will, as we're discussing these waveforms. We all understand frequency because sometimes we have to go a crooked mile just to drive a straight line, part of our transmission. And we see that on the Karakoram Highway and how it zigzags back and forth. So maybe the zig is magnetical and the zag is gravitational. Well, one depends on the other, doesn't it? Because if you don't interact with the other, then you can't zigzag and then you can't repeat. So one is dependent on the other. And so we were lodged into a dilemma here where we're understanding frequencies as a sine wave, but that's in singularity. But you take a sine wave in duality and the picture greatly changes. You still have the zigzag, but do you only have the one zigzag or do you have two zigzags? Or what happens if you modulate them? Or what happens if you distort them? And these are just simple ways to address things. So now we're trying to understand the plasma science in a slightly different way. As originally presented by Marian Tavakoli-Kesh in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. Well, that's what we're familiar with, that matter is created. But what we see is the physical product of that creation. What we ignore is how this matter state came together with 3 different energy densities of antimatter, dark matter, and matter state. And then where did that come from? And where is it going? And in book number 2, The Structure of the Light, we see the source and we see the destination. This is the new travel method that we have to understand. And then, of course, how do you start with the 1 and end up with the 2? So the origin of the universe, as described in book number 3, describes how that happens. And then we see that, wait a second, one of them is our universe. We call it man's universe. It's our universe. Are we the dominant one? Or are we residents in man's universe? So for reference, yes, that's man's universe. But there's another universe out there, a sister universe, complementary, counterweight, balancing off everything, allowing us to exchange. So when we go to book number 2, then we see that there is a source and that from our point of view, we were the destination. So we have to go outside of the box of understanding. And that is what we've been doing for 418 weeks in a row with Rick Crammond and the Universal Council, bringing together the understanding of what it takes to bring one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace together. And why is this being done now? Why wasn't it done in the first place? It seems to be very fundamental. It seems to be foundational. Why are we discussing this after thousands and thousands of years in our history where it seems that we've failed to discuss this? And a lot seems to have to do with this angular density, where we are falling through weakness. And so we get labeled as fallen angels because it increases our density as we come to the ground. It increases our pressure, which therefore means that we're increasing our gravity. The real thing is that it's increasing our dependence on Earth space feeding. And so we become accustomed to that. but there's an internal pressure that is counterbalancing that of the Gauss fields. And this is what allows that angular momentum to be conserved. So this balancing comes in many ways, and we've been grown accustomed to confrontation. We see the duality as duals, and energy manifests as friction. And if we bring our hands together and clench them as fists, well, that manifests into fighting. So here we are. We're always creating a density manifestation. And this is what we call inertia. And so it's fun to say, gentlemen, shake hands and come out fighting. But it's not fun. It's not fun when people are dying or when people are suffering. And it seems to be that, well, that's just the way it is. It's like being old and decrepit. Well, you're getting old, okay, so you have aches and pains. Well, what don't you understand about that? It's perfectly normal. Well, is it normal, or have we acquired that as an attribute of normalcy? So we've been given 10 commandments to, help us understand that. And so these are 10 commandments for humanity. And, it's not 10 commandments for our pets or the plants or the rivers or anything else. And then there are other commandments which complete the whole picture in 24 commandments. But here we have one, that thou shalt not lie. Well, if thou shalt not lie, why do we have to have that as a commandment? Are we afraid that these commandments are not telling the truth? Well, we need to bind our energy. We need to fulfill our self-serving needs. That's the dimension point of me, myself, and I. We need to do that. Well, we've already acquired that. We've already arrived. But do we need to continue to do that and then do it at the expense of others by way of lying, cheating, stealing, and in fact killing? And then we look at the kind of emotion that we have. Do we have the love of humanity? Do we have the love of money? Maybe we have the love of gold, or maybe we have a heart of stone, or maybe we like to be abused. And so we lose our vitality in all of these processes because we are louche leakers, our vitality. And we lose it physically because we lose it emotionally. So we need a boost. And the regular boost that we have here is by acquiring it, either through food or through business or through war, always some kind of confrontation. But what about our emotion? How does that get stabilized? Who does that stabilizing? Is it you, or is it an external force? And if you can't do it, well, just sign this paper and we'll take care of all your ailments. So that becomes a transaction zone. But the fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with singularity, that requires a solo effort. That's what we're going to talk about today. Because duality requires partnership. But what happens when you are partnered with yourself? In other words, me and myself. Well, the partnership requires reciprocity, a balance of incentives. Okay, so it's between me and myself and I. And that's how we develop that I and that ego, because we don't understand the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. We are focused on the higher strength beating the weaker strength or eating the weaker strength. It's all a transaction zone. And the question of whether it's a point of conflict or a binding zone all depends on your point of view, I guess. But that zone is a density manifestation. That's what the inertia is. So from that, as we bring these two fields together, we create something. So when we have this field, we create these nanocharges, which allow us to charge and discharge that system of convergence where everything comes together. And then when we extend that with a nano alignment, where we have this monatomic alignment and we have a direction of flow, and we achieve that by taking a nano coating of a copper wire, and we created a nano coating of a carbon crystal. Well, isn't that interesting? And when you nest all these crystals together, we create a variety of nano monatomic layers. And in between these layers, we have these nano gaps. And so they create this star formation. And so to help you understand, just take your two index fingers from your both hands and bring them together. Don't come out fighting, just rotate one 90 degrees and create this tetrahedron, a star formation. And then as we bring these layers together, we can create nanostars. They are multiple monatomic energy flow systems, and they're all operating as a superconductor at room temperature. And so there has to be a compatibility, an inversion, a sine wave, an up and a down. And the next up is dependent on the down. So we go from up to down to up and up to down. And if we have more than three in a chain, well, that's a polymer, that's a synthetic. So the basic star formation has an orientation where the pole is magnetic and the gravitational base is the foundation. And that gravitational foundation is bringing together the energy fields of the matter state, the dark matter, and the antimatter. And then when we take these individual rotating balls and put them in a star formation, as each ball filled with gas physically, physical balls rotating with a physical gas, they do create a plasma field. And all of these come together in a star formation. And if we double up and we create these rotating ball pairs, and we create a star formation that way, this is what we did in Beijing publicly. It was publicly shown. So why is it so quiet? This is a very pivotal event, very historic event, a public demonstration of producing gold out of thin air and hoping that it would land in those silver spoons. So we see these dynamic reactors, how they come together and they create that plasma field. And that plasma field is positive. That's the point. That's where you start your dimension building. And what point is that? Is that just an arbitrary point, or is that an atomic point, or a nano point, or a pico point? And since we're discussing the pico point, they follow the same rules. You add another point and you connect one. And from there, you build up. But we're talking about charge. And so the endpoints are negative and the connection is positive. That's what you create. But if you bend that, well, now you introduce another negative point. And so that point becomes the inflection point. And now you're introducing the manifestation of hydrogen and oxygen. And so we have this energy parceling unit, which is called water. And water itself is a round combination of two hydrogens and one oxygen. And it forms a magrav. That means it's balanced magnetically and gravitationally. How is it possible that two tiny hydrogens can counterbalance one big fat oxygen? And then when you shear off one of these hydrogens, And we know that that's positive. So now you've given that. Well, now you left behind with a negative charge because that water molecule, which is now hydroxyl, is looking for a place to go. And that is negatively charged. So it is now giving of itself. And wherever it goes, it's looking for some kind of balance. So we discussed in the past these rainbow reflections. And we see that there's a curvature of one rainbow and there's a curvature of a second rainbow. But this kind of curvature is not normal. It does show where the blue color is on the inside of the curve and the red color is on the outside of the curve. But the reflection of the rainbow, although the color sequence is correct, the curvature is not. And when we look at the natural curvature of two rainbows coming together, then we do get the color sequence where the first rainbow on the inside is blue on the inside and red on the outside, and the reflection is red on the inside and blue on the outside, but the curvature is exactly the same. And so there's this gap in the middle. And we say, well, we're kind of crossing the Bordeaux, and what does that mean? Well, it's this gap that has one rainbow and it has a reflection of a second rainbow. And it's not symmetric, it's a reflection. And in between is that gap that creates this peace dome that allows you to go from one side to the other. Well, the one side is the image of the other side. And this is what we've heard so many times. I made man in the image of myself. So there's one image, there's another image, and then there's the I in the middle. And so this, as it relates to the polyatomic solid GaNs inertias, we see that these covalent bonds, when they come together, they're not physical. There's a gap in between. That gap is magnetical. And that is the giver. These are covalent bonds. And so when we look at the dynamic plasma construction, we have two reactors at each point of the plasma stars, and they become a dynamic plasma construction. And so what happens at the core, you create a nucleus, and it's from that nucleus that you get this inertial manifestation. But that's in one direction. Even in singularity, it has to go in two directions. There has to be a counterbalance. And so we look at the conventional counterweight measures. The gravitational ones that we're familiar with are weight and mass, the weight being physical and the mass being atomic. But in the magnetical, we're now introducing a Tesla, which is the nuclear state, and the time, which is the plasma state. The key point is that they are balanced. One moment, please. So now that we've laid that groundwork, now we have to figure out how do we convey this nuclear feeding inertia where we have this gravitational stability, but it all gets broken up into different fragments. And then we find that the energy can transcend the various fragments and the various energy states. So now we have dimensional portability as well. So how do we rationalize all these dimension points? And we're still coping with our singularity. And then when we look at the plasma matter dilemma, what we understand the four basic states, the atomic state, nanostate, and the GAN state, which represent our physical understanding, and the substructure of the plasma state, all of them function off with an equation where we balance the magnetical gravitational fields on one side with the gravitational and magnetical fields on the other side. And we also balance across the various states. We're able to transcend all the full range from the atomic state to the plasma state and all states in between. And this is all made from the various fragments. So these fragments become clues where either the energy is converging or it's diverging. And that's what creates your wave. And so this interaction creates this gravitational convergence, but it also creates a magnetical divergence. And so these things come together and create this pathway. So when we look at the cosmic rays, each of these rays is coming in the singularity. Each of these rays are magnetical. Each of these rays are squeezed into their position. And that position is gravitational. But there are rays of every color, every flavor, and they get sorted out into inertia fields. So which color is it? Well, in the Earth space, it's not just one color, where you have these individual inertia ribbons, where the one color comes in and then is a reflection of itself, and it crosses over as a ribbon. And as we find, these ribbons have meanings, and these meanings have an emotional attachment. And so it's not just that one color, but there's a common denominator that gives you a clue on how these things come together. And so let's say, for instance, on the one hand, where the magnetical comes in, let's say, as a green ribbon, but what goes up must come down. And so we introduce an orange ribbon, and it's in the opposite direction. And it's in the image of itself, isn't it? And you have to have the one with the other before you can repeat that. And as we do, it becomes an embedded transmission and carries forward. What affects this path link and susceptibility? It's the strength. And from that strength becomes a conversion that brings together the magnetical and the gravitational aspect. And it's not just a simple left to right, but it transcends all the ranges. And everywhere where it comes together is a gravitational point. So you don't just go from one blue ribbon to another blue ribbon, but you can go from a purple ribbon to an orange ribbon and still maintain that equilibrium. And so we find that ours is a PICO planet with many, many flavors. And we have basically 7 civilizations that come together, and they all come together with the same story. And that story is the one story that keeps coming back. The same story, the Great Flood. And we are not very knowledgeable of what happened before that, although there are form artifacts that tell us. And we, frankly, are not very knowledgeable of what came after that. although there are many form artifacts. So we now have a different focus on this plasma matter dilemma. It isn't just the equality, it's the equilibrium. It isn't just the equal sign, but it's the gravitational field strength, the positivity, and the contribution to that is the negative charge. But there is a covalent bond between the plasma state and it's balanced off by the transmission state in between, which is your MAGRAV energy transfer state. And each level has that. So here we go. Now we can transcend the various levels and we can bring that energy, which is an emission of intention. This is the energy that is beyond our aura, very dynamic, and involves a plasma interaction where we are launching from one point to a target point. And then from that target point, we launch back to the original target point, right? So there's an upness, there's a downness, there's a yin, there's a yang, there's a balance. And so we see how our cellular nuclear PM ticks are highly gravitational. Each and every cell in our body has that gravitational component. And everything that is outside of it is part of the emission, the magnetical emission. But is it in singularity? Can we say that the kidney and the heart are the same thing? Can we say that the left arm and the right leg are the same thing? Well, it's part of our physicality. So there has to be that emission of intention that is like that ribbon where it comes back to us. So in other words, the GANs of the soul as represented in the cups of life. The cups of life themselves can produce a product. Or you take a cup of emotion and another cup of emotion, and you have a new transaction zone. And you take a cup of physicality and another cup of physicality, and you have a new transaction zone. And then you bring the product of the inertia of the cup of emotions, the cups of emotion and the cups of physicality, and you have another transaction zone. And that becomes your PICO core. And from there, you now have your gravitational confirmation, your gravitational stability, and you are the gravitational entity traveling in a magnetical field. That is the transmission. So when we look at the cup of the universe and we say, well, wait a minute, we have our physicality, but we're connected to the rest of the universe. And so it isn't just the copper GANs, which is physical, and the zinc GANs, which is emotional, or just the carbogen, which is now connected to the universe, or the pituitary, which is our manifestation of our physical connection. These are all the communications of love. Love is an emotion. Which love are we talking about? Which love is that is so strong that is gravitational? Tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree and see if my love continues. Sure. And what are we talking about? Well, historically, Aphrodite was the symbol, this ancient Greek goddess of love, beauty, passion, and procreation, known for her central role in myths, like the Trojan War and her birth from seed foam. A member of the 12 Olympians, she was often associated with Venus in Roman mythology. She was considered a powerful, sometimes capricious force, often accompanied by her son, eros. Is it symmetric? Or is it a reflection? Nothing to discuss there. It's just a myth, isn't it? It's a myth of our existence. Well, we can't refute the scientific evidence. We have the transmission carbon highway, the transition carbon highway, and the transmutation carbon highway. And these are all the carbon inertia highways as they come together the way we did in Beijing on May the 10th. And so they're all supported by an equilibrium. And so the cosmic rays themselves are representative of that, because they are not just simple and unstable, because they're very, very stable as they come from all sorts of sources and interact. But we're very selective on this planet. We have created a free plasma where we have our carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen as part of the creation of life. And so all of the organs, whether they be kidneys or legs, they're all a structure within a structure, and they're all a reflection of our own existence, our own energy, our solo action. And so we have this transaction zone of this solo interaction working with another transaction zone of our solo interaction. And that becomes the gravitational PICO core of me, myself, and I. And we can transcend all of these emotions, can't we? We can go from happiness to bliss to violence and war. What causes those changes? So we are very susceptible in a singularity, as we've seen in Beijing. The gravitational completion comes through an external input of a Gans field of humanity, where the gold finger touches the Gans, and that susceptibility ends up being in duality. But we're not talking about that today. What we're talking about, the gravitational completion in singularity, because that is a manifestation, an inertia density manifestation of the plasma field, where me and myself come together and create the I in the transaction zone, that dimensional point coming together, the magnetical and gravitational convergence. And we have this gravitational confirmation already on this planet, because the oxygen is that non-visible gas that identifies our existence on this planet. And so there's a full gamut going from the plasmatic decay to the Gans. But there's also a Gans decay that goes from gas to liquid to solid. And it's always a gravitational tracking system, gives our gravitational confirmation. And so we become overly dependent on that. And so we need supplementation, because we are consumers. And so we not only consume energy and waste our loosh, but we also acquire knowledge. That helps us. But it's a conditional teaching by ancient teachers. There is an unconditional teaching by which fulfills the needs for this supplementation. There's a new awareness, a historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the Lush harvesting. And so this is all part of the new uncharted territory that we're embarking on. So we see that there are many stars beyond the nanomonatomic state covering that full range from decay to radiation as we describe it. And that artificial intelligence is our ancestral intelligence because we are the technology and we are the inertia product and we are the image of our dimensional convergence point. So that energy that we're talking about is portable. Each portability takes us through different energy states. Elevation takes us from the physical matter state to the energy state, whereas the inertia takes us from the energy state down to the physical matter state. So what we're talking about is elevation. This involves expansion. Expansion just in general terms. And as we see the impact of our third eye, there's gold in them our hills. And this is the greater oneness that we've been trying to teach for 630 knowledge seekers workshops in a row, suddenly transcending the limitations of nuclear science so that we understand the cosmic ray transmission. And as we continue in this training, you can join us in February and March with these classes that help you understand me, myself, and I, and how our research teams are turning diamonds to gold or silver. This is the PICO core of truth. And as we've seen in the 630th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, there are embedded frequencies. And we come to that point of understanding where we have a segregation on one side of me, myself, and I, and on the other side, the product of me, myself, and I, and the separation, the conditioning. So close, and yet so far. Our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to lack of knowledge. Help us achieve our goal, not only through the World Peace Treaty, but as members of the Keshe Foundation's Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. And so we're welcoming all the beautiful plasma travelers of the carbon nations, learning about the new frequencies of the new organic plasma science. Use the World Peace Treaty, choose it, sign it unconditionally, mean it sincerely, because the point of the true PICO-Tech is the polyatomic core manifestation. So the overlapping ribbons of the Earth space create that peace dome. All of us. It isn't just me, myself, and I, but it's times 8 billion on this planet. But we have to take into account the inertia of the present that is governed by the dimensions of history and how many lives have gone in the past. Tie a yellow ribbon to that. It is time to learn the history of self in a universal context. And the PICO state silently explodes as a peaceful superconductor. There's a lot of emotion attached. There's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of misrepresentation. But the ribbons and the oak trees tell the scientific story, transcending the matter, plasma, and universal states. So please continue to deliver the plasma science and enhance our existence daily via the peace dome. using a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. And I hope you're enjoying the direction this new project is taking. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Alex, too, for sharing another aspect of this technology. As I said, we're just basically scratching the surface in our understanding. Mr. Kesh is probably going deeper, but thank you for sharing. This is what it's about. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment or direct us in a different way?
Well, I have a question. I don't know if I'm going to explain it very well.
Well, thank you, Gail.
Um,
I was just going to say, maybe Alex stumped our panelist and he needs to go to a smaller spoon feeding. Thank you, Gail.
well, I'm glad to open the meeting up. Okay, I just, when I look at some of the drawings, okay, I see something that looks like scalar energy. And then Mr. Kesh was talking about um, before things become like the gel of the creator, the energy, before they become particles and waves, um, the gel, as I understood it, is there some sort of vibration that's happening? Or have I got that wrong? And
Oh,
then
I
that,
would say you have that right.
okay, thanks. Um, can you just explain that a little bit for me?
Well, we seem to defer our responsibility to others, and that is really one of the harsh realities of knowledge. The knowledge actually exposes you to that responsibility. And I know in Canada, for instance, we have been conditioned to avoiding responsibility. Oh, it's not my job, or it's above my pay scale, or you know, it's I don't want to be involved. And that is, you can't be not involved. You can't be excommunicated from the plasma reality. No one has that authority. No one has that power to inflict that fear, and no one has that right to impose abuse. So how come they're so successful? And that is because we allow it to happen. We become victimized. And we're not victims. We are basically allowing that to happen because we're not taking that responsibility. So what do you expect when, if you don't look after, for instance, your health, and you say, well, I'm going to go to the hospital to look after my health. And then when you get there and you say, okay, well, the way you did it is not working, so now you're going to do it our way, and you're going to have to like it. Well, now you've exposed yourself to all sorts of, shall we say, alternative methods, when the primary method rests within us. So our thoughts matter. Our soul matters. Our soul of physicality matters. And so we need to take charge and understand that we are a reflection of ourselves. And that's why I always say, thou shalt not lie. Because you can't lie to yourself. You are yourself. And if you're telling a lie and you're expecting someone to believe you, that's a deception. But when you expect yourself to believe your own lies, what is that? That is got to be the worst case scenario. Yeah, I'm happy in my misery. Good, good. Enjoy yourself. Knock yourself out. But you have to participate. You cannot be a non-participatory organism. You're part and parcel of the whole process. So what you emit comes back to you. And that's where the ribbon comes in, because you are that ribbon. And that ribbon is an emotional prompt which triggers your memory. So tie that yellow ribbon so that I know that you remember me. But, you have to be detached in that process so that you can remember yourself. Back to you, Gail.
But how does that, are you saying that in the beginning it's the creator, and in a way he's the yellow ribbon as well, and somehow everything starts almost like an emotion? Or, well, if there was no reflection, there wouldn't be anything happening. There would be no feedback.
You're asking the question or answering the question?
No, no. I'm trying to understand what you were getting at, because it didn't sound like how the vibration starts. But if we're talking about reflections, then I guess, but that means that something had to happen before the particles and the waves, like magic, you see. Okay.
Well, if there is one creator, how do
Mm-hmm.
we
He has
create,
to do it all by
how do we
himself.
create, yeah, how do we create 8 billion individuals?
Start from scratch. Um, I mean, I mean, for me, when we started talking about the original fundamental ray, um, as it starts out, there's some sort of an environment, and as it goes through that environment, the front part starts to slow down, but there's still the original motion from the back. So it's like peeling back the the ray, and from the front to the back, and so it becomes a circular motion, and then it starts to interact with itself, and then from there, I guess that's where I get stuck. But I think it's not just every when we first started, we were told it's just one ray, and but the original part of the ray keeps going on, so there's going to be a lot of pieces that will interact with each other. Maybe I'm, but that's what's in my mind.
Well, of
Okay.
course. And if you have one ray and one inertia ribbon, then the question becomes, is it the yin or is it the yang? Is it the magnetical or is it the gravitational?
Originally the magnetical,
Right.
but as it interacts, then there is a force put on, and it can bend back some of it, not all of it. So then it would take on density, and it's almost like it would pull itself together in a way, but still there would be other parts that are going on. So those would be able to interact. Well, I really don't know. I wasn't there at the beginning. I'm
Well,
kind of like the end result, you know?
you were there at the beginning. That's embedded within you. That's the whole point.
Yeah, to me, everything is circular. Like, I even think that if we elevate, then we end up, we're still connected to the creator. So we actually elevate the creator just by elevating ourselves. So we would improve the whole mess that we have as we go along. Maybe. So to me, it seems circular in a way.
Mhm.
How about simultaneous instead of circular?
Well, when we bring all the people together under the Peace Dome, then that would be very simultaneously.
But would we all be created at the very same time then? I mean, the potential is there.
I've seen an experiment on YouTube, and it was talking about an experiment with mice going back to the 1970s, where they took four mice that were male and four mice that were female and put them together in a confined area and gave them everything that they needed. So, the basic necessities of life are air, water, food, and shelter, pretty much in that order. And as a result, they procreated. And there were thousands of mice. But the area would remain confined. And so because of that closeness, it created a stress. And so the male mice ended up isolating themselves from the females, and the female mice were repelling the males. And so there wasn't the interaction anymore of the basic procreation. And so that population actually extinguished itself through
Oh,
death, and it wasn't replaced through birth. And so the moral of the story really is that that is an artificial environment. But what we see is that the universe is growing. We see that from the solar system, we have the sun at the core, and we have all the planets. And yes, they're coming together. And on each rotation, they become more dense. But we are creating other things all the time because of the equilibrium. So it isn't just the demise of one, but it's the transference of energy. And so if we understand that concept, how do we play within that transference of energy? And since we're on this prison planet, we become confined to that area. And so we become hostile to ourselves, despite the fact that we have social networks that are enhancing that. And we become isolated within our own egos, me, myself, and I-ness. And we can't interact anymore with the other people because we have intermediaries like cell phones and tablets and computers. But here we are using the computers to communicate and to exchange ideas and learn. So it's not just one way, there's another way. And that way means that we have to open up to those possibilities. And we get to choose what those possibilities are. And if we want to be miserable and, become addicted to our faults, failings, and weaknesses, then we can choose that because we are a reflection of ourselves. And so in that process, we become disjointed. And this is where we have that divergence. How do we bridge that? How do we cross that divide where we have the embedded frequencies on one side and we have the embedded frequencies on the other side? We just can't bring them together. So we have a yin without a yang, and we have a yang without a yin, and well, that's just ancient science. That's all mythology.
I I remember Mr. Kesh talking about two civilizations that have disappeared that were very advanced. 130,000 years ago, and I think he said 500,000 years ago. They ended up, I guess, somehow annihilating themselves. So, in a way, I guess we should start traveling so we don't overload and squash everybody together. Because that seems to be a problem.
Well, it is, and we become overly committed to our physicality. That's where the problem sits. We don't want to recognize the other side, which is supporting that physicality. So we have to understand that our physicality is a inertia product field, inertia density manifestation. From what? From the emotions. So we look at that ribbon on the oak tree to trigger that emotion that's saying, yeah, you love me, or yeah, we're looking for a way to deal with cancer, or yeah, we're looking for remembering our lost ones, our loved ones that we lost. So it conveys all these meanings. So that's within us. And we use that as a memory trigger. And because that's within us, then that's what we emit. But can we do something about that? And the way it's presented is like we can't. So we create this artificial divide. I mean, tell me if this doesn't look like the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah, in a way. Well, I wasn't there again, but the idea, yes, in this picture here.
Well, I can't tell you either if it was true or not. But I know one thing for sure, chariots of fire did not have, rockets coming out of the horses. So, it's a figure of speech or metaphor.
Yes.
And there are many discussions in the past about these many metaphors. And so we see these ribbons, how they show a connection. And it's basically ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. And so that emotion is emitted at that crossover point being the inertia density manifestation point. And from there, you have your PICO core. And from there, you have your GANS explosion, because that is what you emit, what you give your time and attention to. So everyone is doing that whether they want to or not. That is not a matter of choice, that's a matter of existence. Well, that's the reality.
Power of positive thinking, in a way.
Well, the power of positive thinking is one way to manipulate it. That requires an external influence. And so, do you have to have someone slap you on the side of your head? Gee, get up, you lazy. And then, or do you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, boy, you really are, a failure. And so that becomes a positive feeling that is amplifying, or shall we say, entrenching that feeling. But if you look in the mirror and say, I'm a real amazing product. How can I maximize my benefit? How can I contribute better? Well, am I happy with the current situation? Well, when we look at the theory of relativity, it just boils down to this. How do you know when you're happy if you don't know what you're like when you're sad? How come, you were, very excited? How do you know that if you weren't depressed? But why do we need to be depressed? And why do we need to be excited? And why do we need to have these extremes? Well, in our physical state, it's a lot of fun, isn't it? You go to a movie and, you see a tearjerker and you start crying, or you listen to a song and you get this emotional feeling, or a couple will have this music coming in the background. Oh, do you remember that? That's when you and I met, and we had that first dance. So these are triggers for our emotion. And so that trigger comes from our own memory. So all of a sudden, wait a second, I'm feeling better because I am looking at myself from a different point of view. So if you were feeling depressed and then suddenly you had this memory of a time when you were extremely happy, wouldn't that make you happy today? Oh, I remember when I was, so happy. Yeah, doesn't that feel good? Shouldn't you strive for that? So that's where the carry forward is. And that's our, shall we say, our karmic relief, because that's what the karma is. It's a carry forward where we carry our baggage. We don't need the baggage. Why do we need to carry that baggage? Let's look at the future, because the future is very bright. But not everybody thinks that way. And until we bring peace and prosperity to this planet, we're going to be stuck in that confined area. But let's remember something. This confined area is not as confined as they tell us. We are not overpopulated. We just don't have enough knowledgeable people to bring about that peace and prosperity the way it's supposed to be. Because there are still people who are engaging in conflict, in wars. And so, yes, as civilizations advance and they are fully embedded in their physicality, refusing to recognize the plasma reality, then that's the alternative. I'll be happy when you're dead. Wow, what a novel concept.
This is very, very well said, Alex.
Well,
I
what
think,
you said was also very well said. You need to listen to your answer because it's very concise. Mine is just a babbling brook. You were very concise.
well, we all like babbling brooks. Well, at least I do. Thank you very much.
All right, any others who'd like to join the conversation? Create some plasmas in a way through your interactions. You talk about these carbon highways, Alex, as in a way, is this a way out? But yet I haven't seen any carbon highways. Are they like the tar highways? I look up in the sky, I don't see any highways. I look on the ground, there's no carbon highways. What are these carbon highways that can help to, in a way, change our dimension?
Well, just a moment, Mark. The carbon-12 is an element that is a physical manifestation, but the carbon-14 is an isotope, and the carbon-16 is an isotope, and the isotopes are unstable. So they're transitory. They come at that point of interchange.
Are they physical highways?
No, sir. They're plasma highways.
So I can't see them, but perhaps I can feel them?
Well, play a song from when, you were young and, full of life. When you were happy. Play
Yeah,
a song and you tell me how you feel.
yeah, that's what he was saying. We can those memories can be brought up again. They're there. He used that example of NASA losing all the movies and the way they got to the moon and the rest of it. But he says we can tap into those memories of emotion from the past and sort of work with that in a way. We've never.
Well, if the current generation were to disappear, then the memories of that space flight would also disappear. But we do have a historical record. So it is going to be impossible to eliminate that. Many have tried, but we still have the story of Atlantis. We still have the story of the Great Flood. Many of this basically, we talk about whitewashing things. Well, the Great Flood did a massive washing. It washed everything away, and yet here we are. So where did that come from? And you say, well, there was this creator, but, was it the creator or another creator? Because how can another creator create you if they themselves weren't creator? So there has to be a connection. That's the carbon-16, the cosmic rays. And as they come and interact and they reflect, bounce off, they get absorbed and get emitted. There's a constant motion. They have to cross over. And when they cross over, you have that increased density, that layering that Irmgard was talking about. And that's just me and myself overlapping with myself and I. So it's not me, it's not myself, but it's I. It's coming together of everything that you do and stand for. So in that process, you exist. And what do you do with that? You cannot do nothing. There is no such thing as nothing. Something is always something. But it could be this or it could be that. And that's based on its susceptibility. Are we so susceptible that we are fulfilling the prophecies of demise? Or are we fulfilling the prophecies of, I don't really see any prophecies of prosperity and peace and bountifulness. I just know that the universe is providing that unconditionally because the sun comes up and it gives unconditionally, not just to Earth, but to Mars and Pluto and everywhere else. So it's a catalytic converter.
And
So
then, do we
how
need
is it giving?
intermediaries to receive those fields from the sun, or do we need intermediaries to receive from the one who created that sun?
Well, you go out into the beach and you answer that question.
Yeah,
Put yourself in the sunlight and see what you get.
I think it's got a lot to do with acknowledging the creator in so many ways, as Ike brought up. I don't have that background where you acknowledge the soul by, I love you, my soul, I live you, my soul, and I love with you. And I adore you, and see what the soul will give back to you. I don't think I've done this enough in my life in a way to acknowledge that. And apparently, a different interaction happens when you acknowledge.
Isn't that the truth?
Firm. And Mr. Kesh says he does this so regularly with all of his partners. Again, could it be a plant in the house or a tree in the yard or something else? He seems to be doing this confirmation of love in a way, or acknowledgement. And this is what he's taught us the creator is hungry for. Hey, I'm here. Acknowledge me. But again, we think it's something far removed from us. But as he said, we're closer than we could ever think, as we're part of the creator. But we've never been really confident enough within our own understanding to start applying that. And I think the acknowledging is part of bringing that or cementing that a little closer together. You wouldn't acknowledge something that you not confirming in a way, or didn't believe in, or maybe you would, I don't know. So we're going to play with that a little bit more. And of course, as I said, he mentioned love about 90 times in this last workshop. So if you're, yes, investigating love, he said, we're just starting to understand, we need to understand the emotions and how they're created and how we can sort of use them to create other things in a way. But it's for you to trigger it. I'm certainly trying to do something with my own structure. I don't think I have the capabilities of, until I understand it, to share properly. As Mr. Kesh says, I don't teach anything I haven't done. So apparently he's done quite a few things. But we're all teachers and we're all students, so no problem sharing what you think you understand.
Wow, that was excellent, Mark. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for allowing me to continue on this. And I really appreciate your presence and your input here because we're all teachers and students, as Mark said, all the time. So let's keep it going.
Okay, anything else from anyone else they'd like to share?
The way I understood from that, the love, the way he was talking about, something was so simple and so small that it's like we're missing it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because he mentioned it so many times.
Do you want to elaborate on that? What do you mean something so small and we're missing it?
When he was talking about love,
Okay. I think you muted your mic, I think, or you dropped out.
yeah, I did. The way he was talking about love, like so many times, and then the way it sounded to me that it was so simple to understand it and to do it and to say it, I guess, to 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 give, and it's so simple that we need to be beat up on to get it. Does that make sense? When you go to like to that section, I've been listening over, quite a few times, and just the way he says it, that the love, the little love, and then I guess I'll have to go back through it just to make sure that I know what he's talking about. It's just the way we understand the love to give so small, so little, it'll just give us so much more. Um,
Okay, you'll get more response with the honey than the vinegar.
yeah, yes.
And apparently this goes from everything we interact with, including the creator. That acknowledgement is something happens apparently in the plasmatic dimension when you sort of acknowledge or confirm that you love, and the creator has fallen in love with every one of the creations, apparently. Maybe different strengths or different things, but I think he's fallen in love with everything. And I know Mr. Kesh had brought a teaching about that where the guy can't even get any work done because he's falling in love with his pen or the paper or the cup that's holding his coffee, and he can't get anything done because he's so in love with everything. And I know Mr. Kesh talked about this, creating this emotion of love, and I believe it'll be where we all start to fall in love with each other and everything. And this is, I think, a dimension of the creator, as opposed to what we read in the holy books where the creator is a destroyer and this and that. Not true, I don't believe. This has been all sort of foisted on us to give us a misunderstanding of the behavior of the creator, which again we can reflect as we start to realize it more and more, that we are made in the image. So this is our closest twin, I think. But yeah, you can go through this workshop. There's 90 different instances of love that he sort of referenced, and there may be loving and some other words in there as well.
Yeah, it seems like the more you go over it, the different things you hear. It's amazing.
So no worries that we haven't fully opened up this workshop, because this will go on for decades and centuries into the future. At least some of the workshops, probably most of them. So there's much in these teachings. Again, but I think through the cosmic ray technology, The teachings will become embedded within your structure for easy recall once this energy dimension starts to come into play in the One Nation Network. You'll have easy access to what you're looking for just by thinking about it, perhaps. Again, it's beyond our imagination what sort of technologies are going to be brought out in this whole process. But as he said, more than understanding the technology is understanding the ethos. Because also, as was indicated, if we give you the technology without the elevation of the soul, within one generation or two, 20 years, 40 years, you'll be right back in the same behavior. So it's all about the elevation of the soul. And that's what all the products and the teachings and everything else. It's not the end all, but it's to get us to the next level or sort of next plateau in this whole process. That we create a permanent peaceful condition on this planet. And then the souls don't carry that killing and destruction into the next creation. So there's a maturing of souls going on this planet, as opposed to what we've been conditioned to or what we've been used to. Many things will change as the period comes along. But again, whether it's next year or next week, we'll have to see. And a lot of that depends on what the governments do and what the knowledge seekers do as well. Just asking us to support and help develop the whole structure. They seem to be handling everything in the background without giving us much detail. For joining us today, we appreciate your presence. And again, be kind and acknowledge someone else. You may have a bigger impact on them and yourself than you could ever imagine. Just with that smile, that word, the holding of the door, the acknowledgement of the person, because that's what I've always heard, that we're all hungry for recognition. And this is what he's saying that this love does, is confirms the existence of the other entity. That's the whole reason the Creator created Mitra, to confirm, and found that match. Thank you all again for being here. We'll continue on this path. And again, this is for ourselves, but also we're gifting this this whole understanding in a way to humanity as well, that we can join with the larger family, which we've been isolated from, even perhaps before the moon landing and everything else. All right, let me just make sure we're sharing this properly. Thank you, Alex, and thank each and every one of you for being here. Your presence is appreciated and acknowledged.